Are we live? Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight, both in person and virtually. My name is Jillian Kwok. I'm the program coordinator here at Poster House. For those who are unfamiliar with the museum or here for the first time, Poster House is the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and the history of the poster. We're thrilled and honored to present tonight's talk, The Radical Politics of Pleasure, alongside our current exhibition, Utopia in Our Time, The Posters of Molly Crabapple, which is on view until April 12th, right at the front of the museum. A few notes, the restrooms are located back by the entrance on the left-hand side across from the cafe. We have listening devices and fidget tools at the info desk in case you need those. And the cafe will be open till 7. So if you haven't used your drink ticket or you want another one, make sure to head back there before then. I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers before we get started. Molly Crabapple is an artist, writer, and activist based in New York, whose work is the subject of our exhibition, Utopia in Our Time. She's the author of 2 books, Drawing Blood and Brothers of the Gun. Her reportage is the 2022 winner of the Bernhard Laber Journalism Award and has been published in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, and elsewhere. She was a 2024 fellow at the Coleman Center at the New York Public Library while researching her upcoming book, Here Where We Live Is Our Country, the story of the Jewish labor Bund. Camille Sojit Pejcha is a Brooklyn-based writer and editor covering sex, culture, art, and nightlife. She is a columnist at Elephant Magazine, and her work has been written about in such publications as Byline, Dazed, Paper, and Office Magazine. So without further ado, please help me welcome Molly and Camille.
Now it is. If you can believe it, I do that for a living. Thank you so much to Poster House and to Molly for having me and the fabulous team here. I'm so excited to get to speak with one of my dear friends about topics near and dear to us, like having fun. And yeah, really thank you to everyone involved with putting this together. Esperanza, the curator, Angelina, Jillian, Shaquille, like so many people were involved in putting this together. So thank you. And thank you guys for being here. Molly, I'm ready to ask you a question.
Ask me a question.
So you're known as a political artist. You have been called the art world's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You have been called the millennial generation's first radical artist, among other descriptions. But you actually got your start in the burlesque world. What is kind of like, tell the people who haven't read your incredible memoir, Drawing Blood, about how that impacted your work and the iconography that you work with.
Thank you for that question. Before I begin, I also want to give my huge thanks to Poster House, which has given me my first museum solo show ever.
What?
And especially to the brilliant curator, Esperanza. Woo! When I think about how I got into burlesque, I want to start with one of my artistic influences, which is Toulouse-Lautrec. I grew up obsessed with Toulouse-Lautrec, the 4-foot-tall poster artist of Paris's Moulin Rouge. I think maybe it was because we were the same height and had the same sour disposition, but I was obsessed with the idea that I too could sit in the corner of a nightclub and watch beautiful girls do astonishing things on stage while I sketched everything down in my sketch pad with a glass of absinthe by my side. I was so obsessed with this that I did my 7th grade diorama of Toulouse-Lautrec and a can-can girl. And because of this obsession and this desire to make that obsession real, I was always looking for my own Moulin Rouge. And when I was 19, I found that in the underground burlesque scene of New York City. I found this scene where men and women as tough and hard and sharp as diamonds and as glittering too, would transform into goddesses and gods on stage every night. They would schlep a drag bag full of costume bits, spend the day beforehand Swarovskiing, attaching Swarovski crystals to their corsets. They would change in alleyways. They would wait around for 5 hours through the very worst rock bands the city has ever produced. You know it if you've danced burlesque. All of this so that they could incarnate the divine for 3 minutes. And I wanted to be around them. That's all I wanted. And I wasn't good enough at that time. It took me a while to get good. I wasn't good enough to just take my sketch pad and say, here, look how brilliant I am. Can we hang? It's not going to happen. But I was a 19-year-old girl. So I tried my hand at burlesque myself. I was wretched at it. Fortunately, this happened in the days before cell phone cameras. But it let me hang out backstage with these amazing, amazing women. And it let me draw them. And I think that everything I've ever done since, whether I was drawing at like a protest, at an occupation, at a checkpoint, it all comes down to those skills that I learned in the nightclub, which is that you sit in averse conditions with a bunch of drunks elbowing you, and you try to draw as quick and as true as you possibly can. You just try to get it down, as few strokes, as right as you can. You see correctly so that your picture can be correct. People like to divide the world into two different realms, where there's the sexy and the serious, where there's the hot, slutty girls in corsets doing some sort of shimmy, and then there's the serious men who talk about politics and shape the future. And that division is so stupid. And every time I draw using those same skills that I learned in burlesque clubs, I want to throw that division into the trash.
Great answer. You also famously were the house artist for The Box. Do you guys know The Box? Yeah, you guys know The Box. But do you know how it was then? She came up in this moment. You have to, if you haven't read her book, you have to. I've read it before, and I read it again recently, and I was like, Jesus Christ, she's so good at this. But you came up at this era of like the collision between extreme opulence and the hyper wealthy and these people who were entertaining them and summoning beauty, but also subversion through the acts. Like, can you kind of paint a picture of the scene and the way that the class dynamics you witnessed there influenced your work? I think you described The Box at one point in Drawing Blood as class warfare in the form of a nightclub. A lot of people would want to know what that means.
I started working as the house artist for The Box, I want to say when I was like 24, 25. It was in New York before the financial crisis of 2008, before the stock market crashed, when there was so much wealth concentrated in such profoundly stupid ventures that you could live entirely off of various cocktail weenies and designer cocktails that various corporations were doing to shill various .com products that would soon crash. And an icon of this era was a nightclub called The Box, which still exists. It looked like an old school bordello, and the worst people in the world would go there to spend $20,000 on champagne in one night. And my friends performed there. You had acts on stage that were the creme de la creme of what underground performance could be. You had drag queens and acrobats. You had people hanging by their toes over a rotating saw. You had my friend Nick Sin, who's a little person, paint himself blue and pretend to be a Smurf while dressing another little, an undressed little person who was a woman posed like Kate Winslet in Titanic. You had a drag queen named Rose Wood who mimed the murder of an audience member on stage and then put on his clothing and left. That's the kind of acts you had. And it was a place where you had the rich who wanted to be around the sexy and interesting, and you had the sexy and interesting that wanted the money of the rich. And so they wanted each other so much, but they fucking hated each other so much. That's what I mean when I say it was class war in the form of the nightclub. And that was where I got to live out my Toulouse-Lautrec fantasy. I had a friend who was performing, and he invited me to come and draw him. And what I have always done whenever I wanted to get attention was I've always taken out my sketchbook and I've drawn like very ostentatiously, because people aren't so used to being drawn the way they are being photographed, and they want to come and ask you about it. And so I did that in the corner, and I somehow sweet-talked one of the owners into being the House Toulouse-Lautrec, which is what I was called. This meant everything from designing massive theatrical backdrops to body painting replicas of the MC's tattoos onto every single member of the staff. And at its high point, it meant that I got to go to London in 2010 and do murals all over their club in Soho. I made the symbol of the box a pig snorting cocaine. And the London club, it had like a round room that you'd go in and then a staircase. And so I made that round room show pigs dressed in traditional British fox hunting gear, riding the symbols of England, hunting a man wearing a fox mask who runs away from them and goes up the staircase where there's all of these godlike portrayals of the performers and waitresses there. And he's chucked back out at the other end like a pig to join the hunt.
You also were painting the box during a moment of political turmoil. I remember you wrote about painting in London as a protest kind of kicked off around you. What questions did that raise for you as an artist between the subject matter you were seeing in those walls and what was happening in the world, and sort of the relationship between these things?
It was a real moment of change for me. I grew up in a good Marxist home. My dad taught me about surplus value when I was 4. I spent all my time protesting the Iraq War after the trade centers, were attacked. So it was not like political action or protests were things that were new or foreign to me. However, for a long time, I felt like they weren't things that I could engage in with my art. And the reason was because I, too, had internalized that dichotomy where there are the serious things over here and the sexy things over here, and I was drawing the sexy things, and so I couldn't do the serious. I was simply too stupid. And when I was in London painting the box, I was working nights because there was construction going on during the day. And me and my friend Melissa were scrubbing nearly frozen colored water into yards and yards of linen to try to get like the perfect painted texture. And we would work all night, and we would drink champagne and eat chips from Tesco. And the entire time I thought that the lunatic who runs the box was going to tear down the whole mural because he was whimsical like that. And then one morning I was getting out of work, and there were these huge protests. And the protests were because England, up until then, had paid for the tuition of students. And this new government was like, hey, students, wouldn't it be so good and responsible if you were like American students and instead you were $30,000 of debt? Wouldn't that be a good idea? And the students were like, fuck no, that would be a terrible idea. And were engaged in massive, massive protests where they would be like kettled out in the freezing cold, and they would be beaten bloody, but they would come out all the time, and they'd taken over like part of London School of Economics. And it was very exciting. And I was just like, what the fuck is wrong with me? History is happening outside, and I'm painting pigs in Nero's nightclub.
Well, I mean, it was pretty political. The work you were doing
it was honest.
there.
What can I say?
Yeah, but something I do love about your work is that you've allowed both of those themes to continue to exist, even as you have embraced, being on the front lines, being like from war zones to nightclubs, finding the kind of human through line and refusing to abandon the sort of sensual reality that people escape to. People also use it to affect change. One of the things that it makes me think of is your role in the Occupy Wall Street movement, which you can paint a picture of what was going on there. But in addition to the occupation and the political agitation, there was this tremendous show of community. And something we bonded over initially was having reported on temporary autonomous zones. Does anyone know what that is? Everyone, yeah, some people know what that is. Sort of spaces that spring up, inherently temporary, to model this sort of utopian way of living, often through protest. Like there were a lot that sprung up during the pandemic, following the George Floyd protests in Seattle and Portland, outside the White House. There was the one in New York. And there are also other places that have been kind of framed that way, from raves to Burning Man, where it's sort of like an independent, self-policing community where the normal rules of society don't apply. Often, it looks like a lot of fun. People are dancing, people are making art, music, while also sort of like raging against the powers that be. For those who weren't there during the Occupy movement, how did you come into it? What did you see? And how did you see the relationship between sort of like taking up space in this way and the change that people wanted to see?
I came to Occupy because Occupy set up just down the street from where I lived in the financial district. I could almost see Zuccotti from my window. I went the first day because I go to protests, that's what I do. And by the second day, it was no longer just a protest. They were starting to build what I can only describe as a mini city inside a square devoted to the prefigurative politics, to trying to embody the world that you wanted now. We could talk about how successful they were or not, but that was one of the goals. And soon an entire infrastructure had come up, from a library to a kitchen with gourmet food to a table where punk kids were giving out free rolly cigarettes to a cursed drum circle that everyone hated to a free store, to a clinic, everything. And in this city where every inch of it is about buying and selling, and if you're not going to buy or sell or work, you're just being moved along, this was a place where you could be. You could be, and you could exist, and you could contribute. I also became very angry because the way that the media was portraying Occupy was so different than what I saw. What I saw was every type of person, including many annoying people, let's be frank, but every type of person was there to protest against the corrupt oligarchy that was wrecking all of our futures. And they were trying to show up however they could. And what the media portrayed was, the media portrayed a bunch of losers in ill-fitting tie-dyed leggings saying incoherent shit. And I was like, this is bullshit. And so I decided to draw it. I brought my sketch pad down and I started to draw the protesters. I also, because I lived near Occupy, I turned my apartment into a press room. I invited journalists and activists from the square to come to drink my whiskey, plug in their laptops, get warm. And I got to know journalists that way, and I got to envy them. Because I was like, what am I doing? Artists, what the market wants from artists is they want us to take our most successful work and plagiarize it in increasingly large formats until we die. That's what the market wants. And meanwhile, journalists were seeing history. They were seeing history as it happened, right? I was so jealous. And so I decided that I would try to use my sketchbook like a journalist, like a photojournalist would use their camera, and that I would also try to document history as it happened. And this was something, that unlike the Civil War people were doing, it's not a new idea, but it's an archaic one. It's not something that people were necessarily doing then. And so I would go down to the square and I would draw. And you talked about how fun these temporary autonomous zones are.
Not always.
Not always. I mean, there's like wretched things too. Anyone who's ever been through a consensus-based decision-making meeting knows how unfun they can also be. But I think what it is that in a place where everything is about buying and selling and working and commodity and get the fuck out once you've paid, it is so fun to have a space that is just about creating something together with all of like the friction and the mess that implies. And also in these streets where every bit of these streets are so privatized that literally like the turnstile has an ad on it. This was a place that was public. It was ours. We were saying like, this is our city too. And we can make this ours. And that attitude makes for the very best parties.
Very true. Will you tell people a little bit about how that experience inspired Shell Game and went into your work?
For those of you who have seen my show out there, there's a poster that says Shell Game, and it has a sort of vampirically pale woman with a vampire squid on her head blowing bubbles. This was the poster for my first big solo show, Shell Game. It was a show that I painted that was supposed to represent the insurrections and crises of 2010 to 2012. So the medical debt crisis, the housing bubble, but also the insurrectionary possibilities. So I drew not just figures representing Occupy Wall Street, but also of anonymous, of the protesters in Tunisia, of the anti-austerity protesters in Greece and in Spain. And I drew these figures using the same iconography that I had learned in nightclubs. So I drew the same sort of Victorian velvet drapes, right, that opened at the Slipper Room where I used to dance. I put them in these surrealist, fantastical costumes. All of them are on stages. I used allegorical animals to represent all of the different people. I had cats, be they evil capitalists, because cats are fun. I just like drawing them. And it was this total moment of fusion of the art that I had done before and the art that I would move towards. The thing where you were saying about refusing to abandon either part of it, the Shell Game really represented that to me because it had the visual iconography of performance, but the content was radical politics.
Yeah, you've always also like kind of been an artist in the world, from the live drawing that you were doing then to the political reporting that you've done. And I think like your kind of refusal to abandon the sensual and tactile aspects of the human experience and of protest, like, I don't know, it really differentiates it to me than someone in their ivory tower trying to make work that they think makes a political statement. Like, even we live in the same neighborhood, so even when we go to a restaurant or bar in the neighborhood, they'll have like a picture that Molly did of the person who runs it. You know, she's very giving of her gifts. I mean, and I've been drawn by you. I've watched you draw in nightlife spaces as well. It's an incredible experience. But going back to what you were talking about a little bit around capital and these spaces of co-creating a reality together, the difference between being a consumer of an experience, like the people at the box who need to be catered to by the staff, and going in and kind of like creating this world together out of shared values. I'm curious, like, what you think the limits and potential are of like pleasure and celebration and sensuality as a container for political change. I go to a lot of sex parties for my work, it's my job, and I see a lot of people looking to escape the norms of society and create a space not unlike a temporary autonomous zone where they want all the rules of reality to be suspended in a moment of radical acceptance, celebration, self-expression, and pleasure. But they're also kind of wrong somehow when they're extremely expensive and gate-kept and based around commerce. It can never really create what happens when people are coming together as equals to build this experience. How would you say your experience, like, as an artist in the world, in these spaces, and watching people co-create these realities has informed your perspective on AI, which you've spoken, at length about, and the way that it kind of wants to flatten the human experience, take the subjectivity and the actual human physicality of you being there out of it. Can you speak a little bit to that?
It's a lot to speak about there.
Sorry.
I mean, the first thing is the reason that those sex parties don't feel the same as the temporary autonomous zones, or even parties, like even just the parties between friends, is that they're trying to create what we have with our friends, but do it in a way where there's no risk. Now, if you think about like what a consumer experience is, a lot of it is about not having risk. I want to order socks, and I want socks to appear for me. If no socks appear, that's bad. If pickles appear instead of socks, also bad. You want to eliminate risk when you're doing buying and selling in that way. And so what these like bankers are trying to do is they're trying to get the experience of going to some depraved bohemian party, but they don't want to risk the fact that no one might be attracted to them, right? They don't want to risk the fact that they might be awkward, that people wouldn't cater to them. They don't want to go in as an equal. They want to go in as a consumer. And so that's why they're paying like $10,000 or whatever. So that they are. So that they can have the facsimile of risk and danger and pleasure without it potentially not being exactly what they want. And that's why it seems so fake. Now, in terms of AI, I am an AI hater. And I truly, I wish every data center would sink into the earth. I think that the tech lords like Sam Altman are some of the lowest creatures to ever, walk upon their bellies on this world. So I truly, I hate AI for the fact that it's eating our entire natural world. I hate it for the fact that it's based on stolen culture. I hate it for the fact that it apparently encourages vulnerable teenagers to kill themselves. There's nothing good with generative AI. But one of the things that I particularly hate it for is philosophical. And that is this idea that the tech lords push with AI and that they push with all sorts of other things, right? Like gig work apps, for instance, which is that the world should be frictionless. And what friction means is, at the end of the day, other people. That instead of you going to a store where you might know the guy that works there, you might say a joke to him, you might see a cute girl that you can flirt with, or see your ex and it puts you into a tailspin, and pet the bodega cat and leave and have all the encounters on the street on the way to and from the store. Instead of all that, that's friction. No. They want a frictionless world where everything is pure consumption, where the only thing you feel is your finger sliding down the glass of a phone until they implant that shit on our face. And where it's all about you in this bubble of pure consumption and pure reinforcement, a sort of Wall-E world, right? Where everyone is like drinking their big gulp and not troubling themselves to have to hurt their little head thinking. And the basis of pleasure is friction, and I mean that in the most literal way. And the basis of human life is friction. And so reject that shit, man. Reject that and commit to other people and commit to this fucking precious world that we live in. Because no app being hawked by some nerdworm like Sam Altman can ever be better than this amazing world that we all built with each other.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, seriously, a sermon. Yeah, I think that like one of the powers that the erotic has, and Audre Lorde writes about this in her seminal text on, I think it's called Uses of the Erotic. She writes about how eroticism can also awaken us to the things that are meaningful in our life. It's not just personal pleasure, but the way that like pleasure and joy can be a tool to kind of discover almost a compass, like what matters outside of this like insane corporate structure that we've been forced into. Sometimes extreme pleasure, moments of self-expression or liberation can draw our awareness to how unfree we feel in the rest of our lives and kind of recenter what matters. And I think that that's part of why they can never be disconnected, and part of why the sort of like cheap dopamine hit of tech doesn't do the same thing. Like it isn't the same thing. And we've been lucky to spend a lot of time partying, a lot of time in artistic communities that Molly has been frequenting for so long. And everything that I think have discovered about New York, Molly has done it first. Molly has been in these rooms for so long, capturing and keeping this beauty alive. And it's very special to carve out spaces outside of the forces that dictate so much of our reality, free spaces. I think the artist Sophia Giovannitti, who wrote an amazing book called Working Girl, calls it spaces outside of empire time. And it's a space we've been lucky to inhabit with many of our great friends, including Max Fractal, who is a frequent collaborator of yours and a big poster and kind of the face of this talk. Could you speak a little bit to your collaboration before we open it up for questions?
Of course. The poster that Camille is talking about is of this beautiful person with like a chiseled torso, long legs and fishnets, torn fishnets, big pleaser, stripper heels in front of the outline of the Williamsburg Bridge. And that is a portrait of my best friend on earth, Max Fractal, who I believe will be performing at some point. Thank you, Shaquille. April 1st, Friday. Max and me discovered each other on a long ago, faraway site called MySpace, where I did a painting that unintentionally echoed one of their songs. I met them at South by Southwest and hung out drinking whiskey all night in the back of their velvet-lined tour bus. It was a very small tour bus. It was really like a tour minivan, I should say, actually. And Max has been my chief artistic collaborator and best friend ever since. And as they have transformed as an artist, because any artist who's good sheds their skin more than snakes do, as they've transformed as an artist, I've been so blessed to chronicle those transformations. And I think that's the other thing, like the joy of having a good collaboration, a good artistic collaboration, that is what like makes the world fucking crackle and shine, and I'm so lucky to have it.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, it's that human quality that ChatGPT has not nailed. I think, how are we doing on time, guys? We have a little time, or?
Another 15 minutes.
Okay, we have a little more time. Oh, wow.
15 minutes in the event for
the
talking?
talking or for the questions? Oh, okay. That seems about right. That seems about right. I was gonna say, we have to talk about your book.
We do have to talk about my book. So, Esperanza, what was the deal with the flyers? Can we pass them out?
Yay.
Okay, so take one and pass them along.
Molly has an amazing book coming out on the revolutionary history of the Jewish labor Bund. It is so popular that I could not even get a galley before this talk because everyone is requesting it. So I'll let her speak a little bit to it and why it's more important now more than ever, as they famously say, to excavate these histories.
I grew up kind of obsessed with my great-grandfather, who was a post-impressionist painter and who did thousands and thousands of paintings that just like surrounded me. I think he taught my mother how to paint and she taught me how to paint, and so I credit the idea that I am an artist from him. And one of the things that he painted was 600 watercolors of the small town in Tsarist Russia that he came from, of his memories of it. And one of them always stood out. It was this girl, and she was wearing like a little corseted waist, and she had long skirt, Gibson girl hair, and she's standing on some muddy street at night, and she's throwing a rock through a window. And her boyfriend is standing next to her with a bag of rocks, because you should not let a lady carry rocks on date night. And it was titled Itka the Bundist, Breaking Windows. And the first time I saw it, I was like, Bundist, what is that? And this became the spark for an obsessive quest to rediscover this socialist, secular, revolutionary, and defiantly anti-Zionist Jewish political party that my great-grandfather belonged to, one that fought with every bit of their strength for Jews to be able to stay in their homes in Eastern Europe, that fought the Nazis, that educated shtetls, that made palaces for the slum kids of Warsaw, and that helped lead the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. And I spent the last 7 years obsessively researching the Jewish labor Bund. I learned Yiddish. I went to Ukraine during the Russian invasion. And the book is coming out in April. So these flyers, they all have a QR code if you would like to pre-order my book, baby. And it's my heart. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you so much.
Should we open it up for questions? Is it time? I'll give up my microphone.
Hi. Hi, Molly. Thank you for the talk. I actually met you in Armenia a few years ago when you painted a very beautiful
God.
mural. Yeah, and it's still in one of my favorite parts of the city to look at. You mentioned a little bit earlier that a good artist sheds skins more than a snake does. And I wonder if you can talk about where you are in your snake process. Have you shed one recently, or do you think you're in the process of changing in that way anytime soon?
You know, this is something that requires a bit of thought, and it's something I've been thinking about myself. And, you know, when you spend 7 years on a project, right, and a project as intense as my book was, you almost don't have it in you to think about what comes next because you're so absorbed in that. But now the book is done. Like, I turned in my final edits today, man. Like, people don't know how many edits there are. I had to edit the index. I had to give the people's thoughts, or I had to give my thoughts on the spelling of the transliteration of various Polish names. Like, there's a lot. So I'm done with it now. And these are the first days that I even have time to think about what comes next. And I don't have a strong idea of that, but the thing that I do know that I want to do is I know that I don't want to write another book for a while because it's fucking miserable, kill me. But also I want to do giant paintings again, like how I did in Shell Game. I think that's what I want to do. I want to do giant paintings of things that I love.
From war to nightclubs to protests to where you're at now, having just finished your research on your book, what is the kind of central characterization of the human spirit that you see?
I don't know if I could make a grand claim about all of humanity, but I can say the central thing that attracts me. And I think I've always been attracted by people who are smart and rebellious and don't know their place. Maybe it's the New Yorker in me, right? Like I always like the hustler, the person who the world wants to assign them one thing and they're like, fuck no, I have far more interesting possibilities for me.
I just started reading your memoir and I'm really enjoying it. Now that you've finished this book, do you have any thoughts or insights about what's happening now here in the US, especially around Minnesota? But, you know, Minnesota is just a repeat of things that have happened continuously in this country. So I don't know if like writing that book provided any insights or different perspectives at all.
I mean, it did. You know, and again, this is something I want to give a little moment to think about how to say it. Writing a book that's about the first half of the 20th century in Europe, right, which is, you know, World War I, it's Nazism, it's Stalinism, it's also just the quotidian persecutions of interwar Poland. You realize how the most noble, valiant people creating beautiful networks of mutual aid and solidarity, how they can be crushed so fucking fast by a state. And writing this book really solidified my view about the necessity of taking political power seriously. I think it's something that really motivated me to work for the Zoran campaign a lot, because if you don't have state power, you're fucking dead if the state really wants to turn against you. And I think that's something we've seen time and time again in America with so many, especially so many Black people who have been murdered by the state, but also other people, leftists, communists, anarchists. It's that the state really can kill you. And so it's really, really important that you take power seriously and that you try to get it, because otherwise bad people will.
Hi. I've read Drawing Blood. I've read Blood of the Gun. I've ordered the Bund book already. That's coming.
Thank you.
I know you're not writing a book anytime soon, you said, but any chance of fiction coming out? Do you have any?
I mean, I'm just not good at it. You know, when I was in high school, I thought that I wanted to be a fiction writer, and I plodded through the first draft of a novel. It is sitting in my drawer. It is wretched. It is not, there's so many other talents to writing fiction that I don't feel I have. I mean, I wish I did, you know, but I don't know, maybe some days, I don't know. Sometimes when you do enough journalism, you just don't want to be bound by the literal reality, and fiction does sometimes sound like a very enticing form of freedom.
It would be so unfair if you were that good at everything.
I can't sing. I'm really terrible at that. No, so many things bad at. Always chosen last for sports.
I'm going to bring this up because I feel like I want to hear you say more words about pleasure. And I do see right now that a lot of people are disconnected from their bodily sensations and even like what the concept of fun is, because they're so focused on the money, focused on getting everything done, focused on achieving. Say there was someone who came to you and they were like, I'm new to discovering my pleasure. What would you suggest for them?
I guess I would ask them what the last thing they really loved was. You know, we all have something, maybe it was even when we were a kid, that we really loved, like maybe what they really loved was to draw things when they were a kid. Maybe they loved how the bright sunlight looked on a wall. Maybe they loved how the old fire escapes looked like after they rained. I think I would just ask them to think back to things that they just really loved and go from there.
Any more questions? All right. All right. Please help me thank Molly and Camille.
Thank you so much, Camille.